Okay, everybody. So we've got a lot to cover in 25 minutes. So this is going to be a pretty quick whirlwind overview of grouse habitat. But like Luke said, my name is Reina. I am the grouse and woodcock specialist for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, just north of where we're at today. So I'm going to be covering grouse really quickly. So grouse themselves have been in decline for several decades, and the majority of that decline is driven by loss of their preferred habitat type, which is young forest habitat. So this is some FIA data from Pennsylvania specifically, but you can see that young forest, that 0 to 20-year category, we've seen that declining trend even in just the last, I think, it's about 20 years. And then across most of their range here in the east, those red bubbles there indicate population decline. So when we zoom in on where we're at here in West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, pretty consistently in decline across that. Are we?
Real quick, I'm going to add this to the Zoom meeting so that everybody on Zoom can see us. Sorry. Guys.
Oh,
pause real quick here. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Okay, cool. So now everybody can see the slides. So hopefully we're all set. But anyways, so yeah, the issue at hand is that grouse themselves are in decline, mainly due to loss of habitat. Their habitat clearly in decline here. And that's why we're all talking today. Another thing to think about with grouse, so in addition to loss of habitat leading to declines over the last several decades, the introduction of West Nile virus into the United States in 1999 and the early 2000s has further contributed to declines. So we didn't realize that grouse were susceptible to this disease for a while. It took kind of an, after a decade or so of the disease being here to kind of piece out that puzzle. But we've since learned through lab trials that they are susceptible to this virus. And so a lot of times when we are managing especially large tracts of forests in Pennsylvania, we try to focus our management on areas where we know the odds that grouse are going to encounter this virus are lower. So high elevation areas, places with more well-drained soils, tend to be where we try to focus our management. So we actually developed a tool called the Grouse Priority Area Siting Tool in Pennsylvania. I know that Maryland kind of had one in development. West Virginia has a similar tool in New York. So other states have developed these tools just to try to pinpoint where it's best to be focusing our management to ensure we're actually getting the benefit in the species response. And another thing to think about with grouse is that they're non-migratory, so they're a resident game bird. They live in the same place all year round. And they also have relatively small home ranges. They use their legs to get around. So when we think about other birds, like songbirds or woodcock, they can move about the landscape because they fly from habitat patch to habitat patch, whereas ruffed grouse have to walk. So they don't move very far. Even something like a turkey, they're another, resident game bird species, but they're bigger, they've got bigger legs. So they're able to use the landscape a little bit more. They might shift their home ranges during the winter and the springtime, but grouse don't do that. So when we're thinking of managing for grouse, we're thinking of a relatively small 50-acre or less area, ideally less than that, that we're giving the individual grouse there everything that they need to survive all seasons of the year. So for males, they're going to be looking to have that dense cover, drumming logs, places that they can display to attract mates, display to defend their territory. The females, it gets a little bit more complicated because they have to go through those fun things like laying eggs and incubating a nest, rearing their young. So they might need even more diverse habitat types within a small area in order to be successful. They do make one large movement their entire life, and that's when they're dispersing as juveniles. So all the grouse that hatch this summer, during the fall and winter, they will disperse to new areas, usually on average about 2 to 3 miles. We see sometimes further dispersals, especially in the Appalachian region, but a lot of that is just because of available quality habitat. They might have to move farther to find what they need. The long story short is that if they don't have to move as much to survive during the year and they don't have to move as much to disperse to new quality habitat, their odds of survival are better. And so providing them everything they need in a small space is really important, planning out management in a way that we can expect grouse to be able to move into that area and respond. And as far as what it looks like, again, young forest habitat, we're talking about, seedling, sapling stands, stands that have really high woody stem density. usually at least 3,000 stems per acre for those who speak in technical terms, of about, 5 to 10 feet tall trees, a little bit taller sometimes too as well. And when we're thinking about the landscape goal, so a larger forested area, you want probably 10 to 15% of that area to be in cover like this. But the thing about young forest cover is that it's ephemeral, right? It only sticks around for, 10 to 15 years most of the time, depending on how quickly your trees grow because of soil quality and all these other things. So you're constantly having to figure out, how do we do a cut here and then, plan out our next cut for 5 to 10 years later to ensure that the grouse always have something that they need within that small area, because again, they are residents, they don't move very much. But they also, in addition to this cover, I've got this nice picture in this middle here of a hen who I think had a brood with her when the photo was taken, but those little chicks are hard to see over the vegetation. But she's in herbaceous plants, which was mentioned already. Making sure that there is those flowering forbs that provide high quality insect food for those young chicks is important as well. So edges along roads that have brambles, you can kind of see in the bottom photo there. There's some brambles along that edge of young forest. That would be a good resource for grouse. So diversity of habitats. Now, how we create that habitat can be kind of jarring. We're talking about, heavy removal of the forest canopy so that you can get a flush of even-aged forest regeneration happening. And so it can look pretty stark at first. That picture at the top right there is a recent cut on a state forest in Pennsylvania right after completion. So strategically placed residual trees being left, but for the most part, removal of everything else. But as you can see, as just a few years go by, you'll start to get that nice flush of green vegetation that once it's about 5 years, 70 years after treatment like this, you can maybe start to see grouse colonizing that stand again. Now, as far as the type of treatment that you do, it can depend a lot on your current stand conditions and what sort of vegetation response you're looking for. So do you have an existing growth of nice oak seedlings and you're just looking to release those? You could probably do an overstory removal to that top left picture there and see those oak seedlings flush and create a new oak layer. That's actually a picture from West Virginia, southern West Virginia, when we went on a field tour on a wildlife management area down there. It was this really awesome thinning that they did that created that. If you have a stand like the bottom where you have a bunch of ferns in the understory, you might not expect the desirable species to be able to respond if you were to let light into that area because they're being shaded out by those ferns. So you might need to go in and do an herbicide treatment before you do any sort of removal. If you have a lot of deer, you might need to fence an area to keep deer out so that they don't, just browse off all those nice seedlings that you're trying to regenerate. Or maybe you're in a situation where you're looking to just rely on stump sprouts. Maybe you've got trees that sprout regularly after cutting. So you might do that sort of a treatment, in keeping in mind the vegetation response that you're trying to get. So those are kind of general things that we think about when we're doing these big removals, but there are some grouse specific considerations that we keep in the back of our mind when I'm trying to design a habitat project for grouse specifically. So like we mentioned with West Nile virus, water management is huge. We want to make sure that we're not creating pools of water through ruts and roads and things that can create habitats for those mosquitoes that carry that West Nile virus. We could end up turning a site that was once really suitable for grouse into something that's maybe a little bit less suitable for them. Maintaining diverse food sources is super important because again, grouse are spending all year in a small area. And so they need to get food there during the summer, during the fall, the winter, and the spring. And so maintaining diverse food sources like grapevine, different types of acorns, other soft mass, making sure there's some herbaceous plants for the summertime, bugs, is again a very important consideration for grouse specifically because they are not moving around. Let's see, what else do we got here? Coarse woody debris. So in addition to using drumming logs for their displaying, so you might retain some residual trees that could be felled later for drumming logs. Grouse nests tend to be in under or next to coarse woody debris. So making sure that you're leaving some wood in a stand can be a way to promote grouse use of that stand into the future. And then trying to reduce hard edges, kind of that bottom left picture there, the left side of that has more of a transitional edge where it goes from an open right of way into kind of like a shrubland into a forest. That can help just create little pockets of spaces that are more useful to grouse than just going from a hard right of way grass edge into mature forest. So that was a big whirlwind, quick overview of what grouse need. And I'm gonna not take questions right now. I'm gonna turn it over to our next speaker, Bob Long. He's gonna talk to you all about woodcock.